Standing Committee on Science and Research. The committee is meeting to study the private sector investment in research and development in Canada. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of all the witnesses and all the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For today's first panel, I would like to welcome our witnesses. Thanks a lot to all the three witnesses for appearing before the committee today. Today we are joined by Mr. Timothy Hennigan, Associate Professor, Strategy and Organization, appearing as an individual. We are also joined by Ken Doyle, Executive Director for Tech Access Canada. And by video conference, we are joined by Dr. Edward McCauley, President and Vice Chancellor for University of Calgary. Welcome to all the witnesses. Thank you. All of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we will go into our round of questioning. And we will begin with Professor Hennigan. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I'm an associate professor, and I hold the TVR Chair in Canadian Business at the Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa. I was previously at the Alberta School of Business. Let me start with an important definition. An entrepreneurial ecosystem is a set of interdependent actors and factors coordinated to enable productive entrepreneurship within a particular territory. Now, to my central point here today. The federal government needs to take high-growth entrepreneurship as seriously as it takes innovation policy. Canada excels at research, but struggles to build ecosystems that capture the value we create. This isn't a university failure. Our researchers are doing exceptional work. The gap worth addressing here at the federal level is in ecosystem infrastructure and coordination. Why does this matter for private sector R&D? Well, companies locate R&D facilities where they see thriving ecosystems, access to talent, acquisition targets, and collaborative partners. When our ecosystems weaken, we don't just lose startups. We lose the corporate R&D investment that sustains long-term innovation capacity. I have 3 core recommendations. First, create federal oversight of entrepreneurial ecosystem health across regions. Right now, regional ecosystems boom and bust with little federal visibility. Just like the Bank of Canada monitors financial system stability, the federal government should track venture capital flows, startup survival rates, talent retention, and collaborative research between academics and other ecosystem actors. When ecosystems show stress, like we saw in our research in Alberta, to coordinate response before collapse. This isn't top-down management, it's early warning and coordination. Second, embrace what Highbar Research calls the integration of basic and responsive research, investing in research excellence and entrepreneurial ecosystems as mutually reinforcing activities. This means when we fund AI research, we simultaneously fund the partnerships between university and industry, venture capital capacity, and anchor customers. We've seen success with initiatives like the Creative Destruction Lab, which has expanded from the University of Toronto to Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, and Halifax. A $25 million federal investment in 2018 has generated billions of dollars in equity value. We need far more parallel path investments like this. Third, create a federal scale-up procurement fund. Provide $500,000 to $5 million contracts over 18 to 24 months deployed strategically to regions showing ecosystem stress, addressing the customer gap that often imperils many promising startups. Let me illustrate these issues with a brief discussion of Alberta's AI ecosystem that I studied with colleagues. Canadian AI research has been world-leading. Richard Sutton from the University of Alberta won the Turing Award. Leading AI researchers chose Canada for our support of research excellence and collaborative university culture. CFAR and Canada's Pan AI strategy have been successful policy initiatives. Around 2017, Alberta appeared to have all the ingredients for success. A 30% investor tax credit attracted capital. The University of Alberta graduates were building and launching AI startups. Google's DeepMind chose Edmonton for a research lab. The Alberta Machine Learning Machine Intelligence Institute connected these elements. On paper, this looked like a thriving AI ecosystem. However, by 2023, the ecosystem was bruised. Google folded the DeepMind lab, the province rescinded the tax credit, while startups like AltaML, DrugBank, and Grandified showed some traction, there were no clear scale-ups like Shopify. Local initiatives like Startup TNT briefly thrived, becoming one of Canada's largest pre-seed investors by 2023, but without sustained federal support, investment activity has fallen dramatically. Alberta's access to venture capital was severely limited by Canada's small VC sector and geographic concentration in Toronto and Vancouver. What happened? Well, human capital proved necessary but not sufficient. Shifting provincial policy undermined foundations. But the critical failure was the lack of local customers. Alberta businesses wouldn't take risks on local AI startups, and limited venture capital meant companies couldn't bridge to larger markets. The ecosystem weakness directly deterred corporate R&D investment. When Google's DeepMind closed its Edmonton lab, there was a loss of private sector R&D spending. Established companies locate R&D facilities where they see thriving ecosystems. By letting ecosystems collapse, we signal to the private sector that R&D investment in Canada carries too much risk. There is a pattern of technological strength not taking root and scaling as it could. This is what my 3 recommendations aim to address. In closing, Canada's pattern of technological strength failing to scale is not inevitable. With federal oversight of ecosystem health, parallel investment in research and commercialization infrastructure, and strategic procurement that creates anchor customers, we can build the conditions for sustained private sector R&D investment. The question isn't whether Canada can produce world-class research. We do. The question is whether we'll build what High-Bar Research calls integrative structures, ecosystems enabling academia and industry to pursue knowledge creation and societal impact simultaneously. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hennigan. Now we will proceed to Mr. Doyle. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to members of the committee for inviting me to appear. Throughout this study, you've heard a lot about the journey from invention to innovation, but I'd like to gently suggest that the journey doesn't end there. The real challenge and the real opportunity is transforming innovations into commercially viable products, processes, and services. One way I like to frame it is that people innovate and companies commercialize. People in labs, shops, garages, classrooms create new ideas. But the small and medium-sized enterprises that make up 99% of Canadian businesses are the ones that turn those ideas into something a customer will pay for. And that final step is where Canada has struggled for a long time. That's where we come in. I serve as Executive Director of Tech Access Canada, the national network of 70 Technology Access Centres, TACs, located at colleges and cégeps across the country. Each of these business innovation and commercialization support centres was selected through a rigorous, merit-based process. They are the best of the best in Canada, embedded in local communities, and trusted by industry. Collectively, TACs help 6,000 Canadian companies every year adopt new technologies, solve technical problems, and accelerate commercialization. If there's a French word I wish I had a clean English equivalent for, it would be accompagnement. That's what the TACs do. We walk with companies. We guide, de-risk, accelerate their commercialization journey, whether that's developing a prototype, validating a process, integrating automation or AI, or figuring out how to scale for production. And I want to highlight something SMEs tell us over and over. Canada doesn't lack ideas, it lacks capacity. Most companies don't have in-house R&D teams. When they innovate, they're trying to solve a problem, fix something, improve something, test something, adopt something. They don't think in terms of doing R&D, they think in terms of getting something done. And there's a message we hear from companies everywhere we go. The process is too complex. When an entrepreneur has to decide between working on their business or spending hours trying to understand a federally funded R&D support program, it's pretty clear what they'll choose. One company told us they spent more time trying to understand a federal program than it took to solve the original technical problem. I don't think that's the kind of R&D the committee had in mind. This is why TACs resonate so strongly. We provide a single door, local expertise, and fast turnaround. And that's why our hallmark Interactive Visits program, a simple, low bureaucracy, 20-hour business innovation engagement, has consistently been oversubscribed for half a decade. Companies line up because it's simple, it meets them at their level, and it delivers results. And that brings me to a scene from An Unexpected Place, the movie 8 Mile. There's a line where Eminem's character tells a friend, "Do you ever wonder at what point you gotta say, forget it, man? Like when you gotta stop living up here and start living down here?" Now, Canada has big, ambitious ideas about innovation, and those matter. But if those big ideas don't reach the companies trying to commercialize them, that brilliance stays up here. We need programs and support mechanisms that live down here, close to the ground where companies actually operate. And finally, let me offer an analogy regarding Canada's position in areas such as artificial intelligence and quantum. I often think about the Yukon gold rush from the 1890s. Canada is already investing billions in what we hope will be the big winners, the prospectors, the claims, the mines, and that's important. But when the gold rush settled, there were only a few big winners and an awful lot of losers. Do you know who made the most money during the gold rush? It was the companies that sold shovels, pickaxes, railway tracks, and services. Today, in the AI gold rush, tax are helping exactly those firms. The Canadian companies building the tools, components, and services that everyone relies on. And they're not just in tech. They're in forestry, fishing, livestock production, agriculture, the sectors that have been analog for a long time, but are now seeing huge gains from adopting innovation. They may not be flashy, but they create real, durable economic value. The problem is there are very few reliable programs designed for them. So, whether AI turns out to be transformational or something closer to the dot-com bubble, I think we can all agree, as Canadians and taxpayers, we don't want to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory again. So let me close with 3 simple ideas that would make a real difference. 1, treat the pre-existing pan-Canadian network of technology access centers as innovation infrastructure. Stable, scaled funding will enable us to meet demand and support many, many more Canadian firms. 2, create simple SME-focused pull mechanisms. Our interactive visits model works. Companies want it, and it directly increases private sector R&D. The program was designed to be modular and scalable. And 3, support the shovel sellers. To achieve widespread economic impact from AI, quantum, clean tech, advanced manufacturing, we must support the enabling companies that will make that value a reality. Canada is rich in ideas, but we need to make it easier for small companies to turn those ideas into commercial success. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Exactly on time. We will now proceed to Dr. Macaulay. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation today. J'apprécie l'opportunité d'être ce comité parlementaire.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this parliamentary committee today.
Private sector investment in R&D is fundamental to who we are at the University of Calgary. We believe that advancing the commercialization of innovation emerging from Canadian universities is a critical driver for building a stronger, more innovative economy for Canada. We are here today not just to agree on the importance of this goal, but to offer our experiences and recommendations from a proven model for achieving it. The University of Calgary is one of Canada's top entrepreneurial universities. We're now a top 5 research institution in Canada, and our innovation ecosystem has created more new companies than any other university in the nation over the past 6 years. This combination of a research-intensive and entrepreneurial university is a powerful combination. We create new knowledge every day, and we mobilize it for the benefit of society as quickly as possible. To give you a tangible sense of what this model looks like in practice and the scale of the impact, I'd like to share a few brief highlights. First, SAGD, or Steam-Assisted Gravity Drainage. This technology, developed in partnership between industry and the University of Calgary, is an innovation that has unlocked trillions of dollars, literally, in economic benefit for Canada. Our research has also led to new geothermal energy technologies through our spin-off, Borealis Geoporo. We developed a globally adopted concussion assessment tool, SCAT, which is now the standard of care for athletes worldwide. We created the NeuroArm, the world's first robot capable of performing precise surgery inside an MRI. And our researchers democratized nuclear magnetic resonance analysis by creating a commercially viable and affordable tool, which is now the foundation of the successful public company, Analysis Corp. We recently attracted Emphasis, one of the world's largest tech companies, to establish a Canadian headquarters, creating 1,000 jobs and partnering with our university on developing quantum applications. And just this past year, we launched the Chi Ventures Accelerator that supports early-stage quantum technology startups. Supporting and accelerating this R&D, our innovation ecosystem also includes the Hunter Hub for Entrepreneurial Thinking, which supports thousands of students and researchers annually. USEED, one of Canada's most active university-based pre-seed funds with a $1 to $30 leverage ratio on investment. CDL Rockies, which has helped ventures raise billions in capital. CDL Rockies alumni companies have created more than 2,500 jobs and raised $2.9 billion in capital. And Innovate Calgary, our business incubator lead innovation hubs in aerospace and so on. These successes were not accidents. They're the result of a deliberate culture and specific support systems. Our commitment to innovation, our researcher-first IP policy, and a robust commercialization pipeline. Systems that we believe can be replicated across the country with the right federal incentives, which I look forward to discussing with you today. Like you, we believe Canada must increase private R&D spending to raise productivity, move up global value chain, and create and retain high-skilled jobs. It's also essential for attracting global investment, enhancing economic resilience, and maximizing the return on public research investments. The federal government's commitment in Budget 2025, including talent attraction investments, the exemption of graduate students from study permit caps, the continuation of the Elevate IP program, and proposed changes to SR&ED policy are important steps forward. However, more can be done to catalyze private R&D investment and strengthen Canada's innovation capacity. I offer the following recommendations. Provide matching funds to incentivize deeper government university industry partnerships. These public-private partnerships are essential for scaling innovation and translating research and impact. Require industry recipients of federal funding to reinvest a proportion into university research partnerships. A streamlined model similar to the industrial and technological benefits policy could help align industry incentives with national research goals. Create dedicated funding for university innovation offices, which are critical for supporting commercialization, IP management, and industry engagement. Directly support university seed funds, such as USEED, which have demonstrated strong returns and play a vital role in nurturing early-stage ventures. Include university-based research capacity in the development of Borealis and fund it at a meaningful level. Canada has the opportunity to build a model that leverages academic expertise to drive breakthrough innovation. Canada's universities are ready to lead. We train the next generation of innovators, produce world-class research, and increasingly translate that research into solutions that benefit society and the economy. But we need the right policy tools and sustained investment to fully realize this potential. At the University of Calgary, we are proud of our entrepreneurial culture, our strong industry partnerships, and our commitment to impact. And we look forward to working with government and industry to build a more innovative and prosperous Canada. Thank you for your time. Merci pour l'opportunité de partager mes idées.
Thank you for having given me the opportunity to share my ideas with you today.
This for the opening remarks. We will start with our first round of questioning, and we will begin with MP Baldinelli for 6 minutes. Please go ahead. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us this morning. Mr. Doyle, I'm going to begin with you. On Friday morning, I had the pleasure of being in Niagara-on-the-Lake while Niagara College did a ribbon-cutting ceremony for their 5th Innovation Center, the Horticultural and Environmental Sciences Innovation Greenhouse. It's a $12 million facility. Again, one of the 5 centers that responds to the growing demand from local businesses that are on the ground to bring forward ideas, and then how can we innovate to provide solutions for those businesses. Now, you had talked, and I mean, several of our witnesses who have come previously had talked about, CGEPs and colleges punching above their weight in terms of getting results, in terms of the government funding that's been provided. About only 4% of Tri-Council funding was provided to colleges and CGEPs. So, I mean, is there a way or a recommendation that you would suggest to the government? You've put 3 ideas forward, but what is the most critical thing that the government could do to support the tech innovation centers? You say there's over 70 now. There's 5 affiliated with Niagara College itself. How can we work to support them? Because I would suggest that they're providing more results and quicker results on the ground.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Absolutely. They punch well above their weight. And I've found that the percentage debate, 4%, 96%, can sometimes come across as a bit simplistic or often entitled. I'm more interested in the quantum, where there's probably a right number the sector could absorb to keep on doing what they're doing. And I think the easiest vehicle to get that activity started on the ground would be the College and Community Innovation Program administered by NSERC on behalf of the Tri-Council. where today that's a $123 million program, which supports centers like the 5 centers at Niagara and then another 119 eligible colleges across the country. What worries me is that on April 1st, 2026, that program's funding gets cut by 45%, and that'll have a tremendous impact on the colleges, absolutely, but what worries me, frankly, is the students who will be missing out on experiential learning opportunities and the thousands of companies that will not get that support from objective innovation intermediaries like the technology access centers and the wider college sector.
And that goes to my second question, because earlier on we had both Michael McDonald and Mark Nantel come forward, and they had discussed about the work that the colleges are doing and the response that they have. You know, how they're retaining the talent, they're responding to the needs of the business community on the ground. However, funding was an issue. And they put forward 2 recommendations to the government prior to the budget. One touches upon the funding that you had just mentioned. They had talked about looking for baseline funding to 2030 of $215 million. And then working again with the tri-agencies to open up, I guess, a greater share of the envelope. And I was wondering, based on what you saw in the budget, were any of those recommendations responded to?
From my read of the budget, no. There was support for the granting councils, the Tri-Council, but nothing earmarked for the college sector, which is what raised some flags for us. Coming towards April 1, where the funding for that program will get cut effectively in half. Sort of penalizing those small innovative companies that want to scale and make use of some of the other really interesting investments in the federal budget.
Oh, interesting. Again, I had mentioned this earlier. As we were preparing for committee, we were looking for background material, and there was a study that was released by Statistics Canada in August of 2025. It was the Survey on Research Activities and Commercialization of Intellectual Property in Higher Education. It was from 2023. In its findings, it stated, colleges and CEGEPs more likely to provide support to small and medium-sized enterprises. 1 in 10 research partnerships, 11% in contracts, 10% were held with colleges and CEGEPs. Again, yet only 4% of the funding that was from the tri-councils. Somehow that was modified by Statistics Canada in October 14th, and that study was removed from the website, which, lauding colleges for what they're doing, and then all of a sudden the report disappears. I'm just wondering, would you have any idea why the government pulled that Statistics Canada report?
Again, thank you. That's a very nuanced question, but it's quite interesting. I actually feel bad for my colleagues at Industry Canada, I said, who worked so hard on this product over the last couple of years, and then it was released with great fanfare, and then it disappeared. And luckily, the internet never forgets, so I was able to get a copy. And you're absolutely right. The colleges show quite well in this document, and really leaning into the core DNA of what they do, supporting small and medium-sized enterprises to the tune of 9,000 compared to 6,500 for the universities. So it really well articulated our role in the innovation ecosystem, and it was confusing why it just sort of disappeared one day off the internet.
Yeah, just in Niagara College, for example, in 2024, I believe it was able to bring in $9 million of funding to support the work that it's doing in support of the community and what the community is bringing forward. It's a model that I think that works actually on the ground, and it's something I think that we should be working to foster and encourage and replicate. Thank you.
We will now proceed to MP Rana for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, all the witnesses, spending your time with us on Monday morning. My question is to Dr. Edward Macaulay. As you mentioned earlier during your testimony, that the University of Calgary has become one of Canada's top research institutions and a leader in translating research into successful startups. So what approaches have worked best to help researchers turn their ideas into businesses? And how can federal programs better support the transition?
Thank you. As I mentioned, we've developed a support system at the University of Calgary involving Hunter Hub for Entrepreneurial Thinking, CDL Rockies, Innovate Calgary, and so on. And these are support systems for our students, faculty, and staff who want to take that journey of mobilizing their knowledge for the benefit of society. And in that process, we want to ensure that their various avenues that are open to them are can be explained clearly and can actually be operated on. For example, creating a small and medium enterprise, creating a new company, or might it be better to license that technology and working with industry and to obtain revenue that way. So those are some of the support systems we put in place. What's really also very important is the collaboration with industry. The University of Calgary, in essence, receives about 25 to 30% of its funding from collaboration with industry and for not-for-profits. So these the collaborations are really, really important because we're producing the talent to support those industrial sectors, but we're also working hand in hand with industry to, in essence, pull the technologies and the great ideas out and mobilize that for the benefit of society.
And how do programs like co-ops or partnerships with companies help students get ready to work in research and innovation?
Obviously, they provide essential opportunities for our students to gauge an idea for their career opportunities as to what it's like to work both either in an SME or in a larger corporation. Programs like MyTax, I think, have been very, very beneficial in terms of helping to support that. Again, the more things we can do to show industry and to the rest of Canada the talent that we have at our post-secondary systems across the country and how important the ideas are that those individuals have in terms of promoting Canada, I think is beneficial.
Thank you very much. And my question is to you, Mr. Hannigan. How can Canada better align its innovation policy with the actual social and organizational processes that shape commercialization outcomes?
Thank you for your question. I think it's important to distinguish between organizations establishing business models, proof of their business models, versus their operating models that they can scale up. And I think a lot of efforts in entrepreneurship are in the former and not the latter. And when I speak about an ecosystem and the degree to which we can provide supports for scale-ups, I'm really focusing on the latter. So scaling up is moving beyond just proving it, and it's building markets. It's leaning into strategy so that we can have strategic strengths at the industrial level.
Thank you. And your recent work examines a few of the risks associated with generative AI. So what considerations should Canada keep in mind when promoting private investments in AI-related research commercialization?
Thank you. Yes, my recent research, I've had a few papers out recently. I'm not going to mention the word that we've coined, but we're pointing to the risks of embracing the outputs of generative AI uncritically, which is not to say that generative AI is not a transformative technology. I actually think that it is. But I think that just thinking about the technology and not thinking about the practices within organizations, that can lead to hazards. And those hazards can be quite problematic. And so the extent to which we can attend to those hazards, we can position the technology around issues that we've known about in strategic management for a long time, like capacity, like competitive advantage, like routines. This is where we can unlock value in generative AI. But if we just think about this technology as magic, that's problematic.
And what role does institutional support play in enabling commercialization, especially in early stage innovation ecosystems?
It can play several. I think some of the comments we've heard today so far are helpful in this regard. But I come back to my framing of we need to think about first proving business models and second scaling operating models. It's one thing to have institutional supports to get the minimum viable product, to prove that a customer might want to actually pay money for the value proposition that is being created by the organization. But it's a whole other thing to scale that up into a market that is repeatable so that the company can survive over time. And I think the institutional supports for that are more on the ecosystem side. And we do have some support systems in place, but in my comments I pointed to the gap that we have is we have no oversight looking across ecosystems in Canada, and to the extent that they collapse, no one's really looking after that. And that's very much a local problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Doyle, What?
5 seconds, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes. Please go
Merci
ahead.
beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to welcome our witnesses. Now, in the Canada Strong budget, the government says that it wants to be a leader in innovation, and yet there is no increase for the tri-agencies, although these researchers are with us today have seen that their budget is under 40% of the real cost. So I'd like to hear what you have to say as a professor. How can we talk about a Canada Strong in the area of innovation when it's so difficult to support those who are coming behind us?
I think it's important to distinguish between the Tri-Council funding that's going to basic science and also going to social science. Basic science, we're actually doing quite well. With social science, my study that I'm presenting here today was funded by SHRC. I look at this as being an example of an early warning study of what is going wrong. We need to pay attention to both. We need to balance both.
Hennigan, je vais vous laisser peut-être nous revenir par écrit pour
Mr. Hennigan, perhaps in case you misunderstood my question, you can answer us in writing. But there's $2.5 billion under Canada Strong to attract foreign research. However, there is no money to improve the conditions of students, doctoral students, postdoc students, and researchers and professors. So I'd like to hear you, as a professor, tell us, is this not a strategy sending a message that Canada is funding talent that it wants to attract rather than research that is already happening here in our own institutions? Well, that tends to happen. Just a moment. Madam Chair, I believe we have, in case you were listening, a problem hearing the interpretation.
Okay. So we will look into it. Can you say a few sentences?
1, 2, 3.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca, can you say a few sentences?
Oui,
so
bonjour,
that
Madame
we
la
can
Présidente.
check?
Est-ce que vous m'écoutez?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Can you hear me when I'm speaking to you? Yes, no, maybe? Yes? Thank you very much.
So we will resume. Mr. Blanchet-Jonca, please go ahead.
Madame la Présidente, je vais vous demander de recommencer depuis le début. Parce que
Madam
là,
Chair, can you start my time over again? Because I don't think the witness actually got to hear the questions. Thank you.
vous savez, hein,
You
je
know,
pense-
science is very important. I take this to heart, and I have good questions for my colleague here today. Now, Mr. Hennigan, as I was saying, Canada, in its budget tabled on the 4th of November last, called Canada Strong, wants to make this country a leader in innovation, a world leader. But in the most recent budget, there is nothing for the tri-agencies. And young researchers over the past 20 years have seen a freeze on their grants. So there's nothing for them in this most recent budget in terms of indexation. And after 20 years of this, they're still 40% under the real cost of living. So if we want this ecosystem, how can we talk about being a leadership in innovation when we're letting down our young researchers?
See, that's a really good question.
Je sais.
I celebrate this budget and its attempts to try to strategically bring top researchers here, but I also recognize that we cannot leave our young researchers behind. And I do fear that we are not keeping up with inflation with respect to funding our young researchers, and this is a problem. I don't have a firm solution for this, but I will say, in innovation terms, we can't just have stars, we also have to have complementary resources that unlock the value of those stars.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais vous laisser replacer votre oreillette pour
Thank you very much. I'll let you put your earpiece back on so that you can understand me. As you know, there are many people who weren't celebrating when they heard this last budget, and some of them are here today. So in this budget, there's supposed to be $1.2 billion in order to attract foreign researchers. So not one penny is going towards improving the situation of young researchers, postdocs, doc students, and even young professors. So Mr. Hannigan, how do you think this strategy will not end up sending the message that we're funding talent that we want to attract rather than funding our own institutions?
So I understand that university funding occurs at multiple levels. I think provincial funding is important as well. This is not just a federal concern. This is a concern that Canadian governments at multiple levels of jurisdiction have to attend to. My comments today regarding building our ecosystems to be more robust are about continuing our funding and our strengths for research, basic science, the inputs to this whole system, but also to think about linking this to ecosystems that can deal with what happens when students graduate. What we want to avoid are zombie companies that are just going from grant to grant. We actually want to build them up. But we cannot shift our attention only to the ecosystem spin out and lose the engine that's driving this whole thing. So I want to appreciate the strengths of our system, our university system, but also point to what we can do in addition to this. Now, I think your comments pointing to this new budget are interesting because, yes, it would be great to have star researchers coming here, but if we don't have complementary assets to help them, then are we really going to unlock the value that they bring?
Je poursuis mes questions, M. Hannigan.
Mr. Hannigan, I'm going to continue with you. In the context of the ecosystem that you're a part of, almost 2/3 of students are likely to leave the country after finishing their diploma or after they've graduated. So what I'd like to know is if the budget will the budget not increase this drain and have because it's focusing more on foreign attraction?
So regarding draining foreign students who we train here, this is a problem, a potential problem. I was in the UK previous to my experience in Alberta, and Oxford had the same problem when I was there. This also speaks to the need to have a coordinated strategic approach to thinking about an ecosystem. What happens after we graduate our students? They incubate companies inside universities, great, but where do they find their first customer? How do they then build that up? How can we get them to stick around given that we've effectively invested in them?
Mm-hmm. M. Hannigan, attirer des chercheurs.
Attracting research requires equipment, labs. There are students that have graduated, that are graduates, and our research don't have a way of supporting new researchers. There's been a freeze. There's been a reduction in funding, R&D. So, and this budget isn't particularly inspiring. So. Is Canada going to be able to integrate these foreign researchers without endangering those researchers who are already here?
So it's a good question, a little bit outside of the scope of my expertise, but I will say that we absolutely need to maintain the strengths of our existing system, and we cannot let it fall by the wayside.
Merci beaucoup. M. Hannigan, on va essayer d'y aller de global. Je comprends que c'est pas votre expertise.
Thank you very much. I realize this is outside your expertise, but there has been a 20% freeze. There's been no increase to the granting councils. There are about 1/3 of young researchers who are considering leaving the country. But is it not a bad idea to focus on attracting foreign researchers rather than supporting those who have done their work and studies here?
So again, this is a bit outside of my expertise, but what I will say is there is a strategic imperative of trying to bring more money into the system in general. And I think the legitimacy that STAR researchers can bring will actually be quite helpful for private sector investments.
Time is up. We will now proceed to MP Mahal for 5 minutes. This is our second round of questioning. MP Mahal, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses who came up today and for their time. I would want to continue with Ken Diol. Thanks for coming back again in this committee. As you have mentioned in the last part of your testimony today, there was a recent report that was released by Stats Canada under the title of Survey on Activities and Commercialization of Intellectual Property in Higher Education 2023. That was mysteriously taken down by the department after releasing it. So have you seen that report? You have seen that report. According to that report, 1 in 10 of R&D contracts are held with the colleges. When it comes to dollars, are colleges punching above the weight when considering funding?
Yes, I believe at present the college sector receives about 2.5–3% of the federal investments in higher research or higher education research and development. So by extension, 10% of the partnerships and contracts going to the college sector would show, yeah, we're punching above our weight comfortably.
And in the same report, it says 51% of the IP licensing from post-secondary institutions are done with the foreign organizations. What are we seeing in Canada made technology commercialized in foreign countries, not in Canada?
Yes, that is unfortunate. I believe the report did mention how the university-derived intellectual property disclosures make up about 90% of what the report tracked, and that more than 50% of these licenses went to foreign organizations. So just like we have been for the last few decades, these brilliant big ideas are being supported publicly in Canada, developed in Canada, but then, as I mentioned in my remarks, we go from invention to innovation and then stop, and other countries are more than happy to license that IP, fully commercialize it, and sell it back to us as finished products, processes, or services. And that's probably what we have to shine a bigger spotlight on if we do want to tackle the productivity and competitiveness issues.
Thank you. And seeing the current budget that we have right now, there is nothing much in the budget to support colleges and tech institutes. How do you feel that the room that is already stretched for colleges, private colleges, when it comes to funding in comparison to universities and bigger institutes, how would you think it's going to impact with the already saturated market when it comes to funding? How do you think your performance is going to be in this competitive field?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. It's a bit of a nuanced answer where everything we do is collaborative with industry. So the real beneficiaries of any activity that we undertake are these small Canadian companies that want to innovate. And when we do hit, sort of funding obstacles, it's those companies that will suffer. Our capacity will drop, and our capacity dictates how many companies we can assist each year, as well as how many students will benefit from experiential learning opportunities, both university and college students. What I did find interesting in the budget was the productivity super deduction, where there's support for advanced write-offs for companies that invest in technology adoption, increased supports for the scientific research experimental development tax credit, and then the IP Assist, Elevate IP, intellectual property supports, which are all well and good. But as the data has shown for decades now, Canadian companies don't invest in technology adoption, which doesn't put them in a position to do R&D, which means they can't create IP to then export. So I find, while you mentioned there's not direct support for the colleges in the budget, I think there may be some indirect avenues for us to assist, mainly being those objective innovation intermediaries that can support with recommendations of technology adoption, collaborative R&D, validating that, and then if it is protectable, getting those IP supports in place and the scale up to commercialization and export.
Thank you so much. On a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with the current budget in comparison to when it comes to college funding over university fundings?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I I've studied the budget closely. Given the fiscally constrained times we're in and the other turbulence out there, it's a very ambitious budget, and without, I guess, seeing how things are going to be implemented on the ground, I'd be reluctant to rate it out of 10, but I guess I'd probably have to give it a strong 6, 7.
And we will now proceed to MP Jessic for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And we've certainly heard some very interesting testimony from all three of our witnesses today. What struck me is that both Mr. Doyle and Tech Access and Dr. Macaulay at the University of Calgary have taken somewhat of a similar approach when it comes to what we're calling applied research. In other words, Mr. Doyle, Tech Access provides a single door. You assist entrepreneurs, industry, small business to potentially commercialize through the assistance of applications for grants, et cetera, et cetera. And the University of Calgary has had a number of successes also. One of the things that intrigues me from your testimony, Dr. Macaulay, was your reference to national research goals. Has the University of Calgary become known for concentrating on certain research goals related to your environment in Alberta? How have you perhaps concentrated on specific areas of research?
Thank you. We're a comprehensive research intensive university, but we pride ourselves in looking, provincially as well as nationally, as where we can contribute people and talent as well as ideas. In essence, we've taken the approach that we need the right priorities, the right people, and the right catalysts. And the right priorities are around supporting our sector in the province of Alberta, for example, in the areas of energy, in health, in agriculture, finance, and so on. And then looking at the horizontals that support growth in those sectors, whether it be quantum applications, data science, and so on. So really, yes, we have taken an approach of prioritization, but what's really interesting is that the contributions from across our university span all of our different faculties, because the problems in those areas are truly multidisciplinary. The solutions are truly multidisciplinary, and we're able to do that. In essence, at a national level, I think it's obviously very, very important, given the limited resources we have, to focus on very important priorities around our sovereignty, around protection, and around building a prosperous Canada.
And further to that, as a member of the U15, I presume you bring your ideas to U15 and consequently to ISED, to the minister, with these kinds of priorities in mind. To what extent have you heard about the federal government's desire to establish mission-driven kinds of priorities? There has been talk of a capstone organization. Are you aware of those federal initiatives, and what is your opinion of them?
Yes, I've actually testified in front of this committee previously about the importance of mission-driven research. There really isn't a trade-off between discovery research and mission-driven research. Canada is at a very, very important point internationally where we have to identify our priorities, where we want to lead on the world stage, and where we want to contribute. And that's where all universities across the country and polytechnics, et cetera, all of our post-secondary institutions are willing to contribute. The U15, because of the capacity and because of the talent that we have some ability to provide results at scale, which I think are really obviously very, very important. We're well aware of how the programs are being developed and so on. The capstone provides, and it was mentioned in the budget, the capstone provides that opportunity for have that discussion around how we actually deal with mission-driven research and bringing together all the different disciplines and expertise from across the country to actually solve those problems.
Thank you. Dr. Hannigan, I'm wondering if you could give us some of your thoughts on the enhancement to the scientific research and experimental development tax incentives. We've heard from Mr. Doyle some skepticism about the value of these. How do you see them fitting into the whole picture here?
Thank you for the question. I think they're important, but they're underutilized. And I think it needs to appear as one tool amidst several. And my message here today is about strengthening ecosystems and strengthening the signals to encourage private investment, of which that is what you've mentioned is one of the tools that we can use.
And why do you think the SRED is underutilized?
Well, I haven't studied this, so this is at fear of being outside of my expertise. But what I will suggest is that it is underutilized because there isn't a particularly good reason to lean into them at a high level.
We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Juncker for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Question pour Monsieur Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Mr. Doyle. So you represent Tax Access Canada, and we have access centres in Quebec, CCTs, that are funded by CRSH, and they get $350,000. But in my riding, there is an organization that does exactly the same work, and they only get $100,000. So I'd like to know how you feel about differential treatment for organizations that are doing similar research, or is this just something that has to be corrected? Thank you very much. I think this is a structural inequity that needs to be corrected. There are only $100,000 per year that are given to these centres in Quebec. But there are centres as well that have actually won excellency awards that don't even have this designation to receive that funding. So there's $350,000 in the rest of Canada and $100,000 in Quebec. And this is the only example we've been able to find when we look at all the centres, all the programs that support these centres. And in fact, the centres in Quebec are being treated like second-class citizens. In order to resolve resolve this issue, it costs less than $7 million a year. Well, that's incredible. And this goes back to 2012. So if you look at $200 million that the Quebec network has lost, what do you think the consequences might be? For example, the ability of the regions in Quebec to support innovation and commercialization, as well as small and medium-sized businesses. Well, I've never heard a good reason why these centres in Quebec only receive a third of the subsidies that other centres in the rest of Canada receive, and that hasn't changed since 2012. Because we're talking about $500,000 a year if you take into account inflation. So the people who lose this are the small and medium-sized businesses because there's a lack of capacity in the centres in order to be able to meet client demand. And for centres in Quebec, it's not just the SMEs that suffer. You know, there's expertise there that we're losing. They're incredible, and they require support. And so their choices have to be made.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Time is up. So now we will have 2.5 minutes with MP De Ridder and then 2.5 minutes with MP Noor Mohammed, and then we will end this panel. So MP De Ridder, please go ahead. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Welcome back, Ken. My question is for you again. Good to see you here. So the government announced a productivity super deduction to incentivize investment in this new budget. While this deduction accelerates write-offs, it does nothing to address the structural issues behind Canada's productivity crisis: high tax, regulatory delays, slow approvals, capital flight, and a declining competitiveness compared to peer countries. A faster write-off doesn't solve those fundamental barriers. How do you think this could meaningfully change SMEs and help them commercialize with just a write-off program and not eliminating these barriers that are in place?
Well, thank you for the question, and I know my colleagues at the Canadian Federation of Independent Business are quite seized with the red tape and the regulatory piece. What I noticed with the accelerated write-off is that we at Tech Access Canada, our centers deal with a lot of companies that are prone to techno-lust. So they may have gone to a trade show over in Europe and saw this incredible piece of equipment. They think, wow, we need that. And they spend $600,000-$700,000 on a robot welder. It arrives on a pallet, and they have no idea what to do with it. So they come to us, and we explain, okay, you probably didn't need to get that one. You would have been fine with this, much more scaled-down version. But now we can help you take this off-the-shelf, bleeding-edge equipment and integrate it into your workflow. And that's effectively, they don't know what they don't know. So it'd be interesting to have a layer on there where if companies would come to a technology access center to get an objective assessment of what technologies they could adopt, they'd be spending their money wisely on the right equipment for the right situation for their needs, and then be able to write it off. That CapEx expenditure is fantastic because then those resources could be devoted potentially to other research and development or commercialization activities.
So then wouldn't it make more sense then to help fund more applied research than just create another write-off?
I think just facilitating access to objective innovation intermediaries who will tell them, this is the right use case for you. It'll be different than your neighbor down the street. And other countries who've lightly borrowed the Technology Access Center model are using that as a way to put those centers as a stage gate in between companies and government supports funded by taxpayers to make sure that they get objective advice on the right solution for their unique challenge. And maybe it's something we might want to look into.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the professor here a question as well. We've heard from multiple witnesses. Oh, is it? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
We will end this panel with MP Noor Mohammed for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our guests. I just want to begin by taking a brief moment just to clarify some things that have been said throughout this conversation by some of my friends across. And it's nice to see them embracing the need for more funding for science and research. I think their base may have some challenges with that, given the narrative about defunding universities, but here we are. A few things that I think are important in this budget that I'd love your opinion on, Professor Hannigan. One is $1.7 billion for new researchers, $1 billion on a cash-on-cash basis for venture, $750 million for early-stage companies. As a former entrepreneur, these are things that I really wanted to see in this country, access to early-stage capital. I had to raise my money outside the country. So it's nice that it's happening here, or this hopefully will happen here. We've also heard this narrative about the tax rate in this country. With 13% now, Canada will have the lowest effective corporate tax rate in the G7, much to, I hope, the delight of members opposite. With those initiatives, with the streamlining of the SR&ED process, with the productivity superdeduction, with accelerated pathing for H-1B and the types of workers we actually need in tech and innovation here, bundled all that together, does that not now give Canada something that it hasn't had in the past, the capacity to really build an ecosystem for many of the folks that are coming out of institutions like yours who are looking for early stage capital, looking for access to the vehicles and the means by which to grow and innovate and to build here in this country?
Positives. But my core message here is that companies need functioning ecosystems that make R&D investments strategically sensible, not just tax advantage.
So let's talk about that for a brief moment. One of the big priorities in this budget is buying Canadian, incentivizing government, incentivizing Canadian corporations to buy Canadian. If that budget doesn't pass and that provision isn't there, surely that's a gap. But if that provision passes as part of this budget, does that not then address precisely what you're talking about, incentivizing Canada to buy Canadian, incentivizing Canadian governments to buy Canadian, incentivizing Canadian businesses to buy Canadian?
The spirit of it does, yes. The specifics, maybe. I think this is where we need to collectively appreciate, like the history of Silicon Valley is in part because of DARPA, which is the Department of Defense. Is Canada going to link its investments in our military with our building of an ecosystem? I don't know.
I think that's where you've seen Polaris. You've seen a lot of word that's coming out now in terms of dual use and the ability to be able to fund that to the tune of over $3 billion. So let's hope that what you're talking about, what this government is going to try and do, actually align in the way that we all hope. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, this panel comes to an end, and I really want to thank, on behalf of all the members, to all the three witnesses for your testimony today. And we will suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that we can get the witnesses for the second panel on board. Thank you. So the meeting is suspended. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can make a selection for the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And for this panel, I would like to welcome our two witnesses who are both joining by video conference. We are joined by Cam Link, Chief Executive Officer of Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute. We are also joined by Professor Kevin Otterson, Founding Executive Director for CarbX. So both the witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we will proceed to the round of questioning. Mr. Link, we will start with you. You have the floor, and we'll have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair and honorable members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. My name's Cam Linke. I'm the CEO of AMI, the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, one of Canada's 3 national centers of excellence in artificial intelligence. Our mission encompasses both fundamental research, applied innovation, and also the diffusion of technology, specifically artificial intelligence, across Canada, which I believe provides us a unique vantage point on the committee's study. To start, Canada should take a lot of pride in its scientific leadership in artificial intelligence. Researchers such as Drs. Richard Sutton, Jeffrey Hinton, Yoshua Bengio are 3 Turing Award laureates, apologies, one did win a Nobel Prize, laid the foundations of modern artificial intelligence and have positioned Canada as a global leader in AI research excellence. In fact, if you look, nearly all of the core AI advances that are powering the global AI revolution today can be traced back to researchers at Canada's 3 AI institutes. That said, investment in AI research and development by Canadian industry has been relatively weak. Today, I'm going to focus on 3 challenges that we see in the Canadian economy and 3 things that we found helpful in overcoming them. At AMI, we've now worked with hundreds of companies, from small startups and SMEs to large firms, and we consistently see 3 things are structural barriers across Canada that limit private sector engagement. The first, and just to be clear, is the structure of Canada's economy, and I think we need to be realistic about this. We have a small number of large firms that operate often in protected markets, and we have a very, very large number of SMEs in Canada. These large, structurally protected firms often lack the competitive pressure to pursue ambitious R&D. Further, SMEs, which make up the vast majority of Canadian businesses, frequently want to innovate but lack the capital or expertise to do so. And with a relatively low number of grad student researchers working within Canadian companies, many of those companies lack the internal capacity to identify and execute meaningful projects. The second barrier is around our funding architecture. Canada tends to be a grant-heavy, risk capital light ecosystem. We offer a number of programs, but they're often dominated by small, fragmented grants that require significant administrative overhead to achieve impact. Grant funding in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It's a great thing to be able to make targeted investments. That said, compared to risk capital, often in the form of venture capital, it leads to smaller, less impactful applied research being done in Canadian companies. And the third barrier is the absence of foundational research infrastructure. Companies can't invest in R&D if the necessary infrastructure isn't in place. Access to compute, specialized facilities, secure environments, data pipelines that connect universities to industry are essential. Without these, firms face an impossible choice: build the infrastructure themselves, which is often cost prohibitive, or take the research elsewhere. As an example, many AI advances that began here in Canada found their commercial impact outside of Canada, where the necessary computing resources were available. At AMI, we've seen these 3 challenges firsthand and worked with our partners to tackle them. So I'd like to highlight three ways that we've seen success. The first is in early stage support. At AMI, our advanced technology program collaborates with companies to identify research opportunities that drive business value. then we work with them very closely to make sure that research project succeeds. For SMEs in Canada, this early expertise helps de-risk the project without requiring significant upfront investment and enables them to source the necessary talent and progress on their projects. It should be noted that typically this is done with company engagements without grant support, which I'm saying as a positive thing. This is where companies have seen the value in these engagements and seen the groundwork to be able to invest. Next, let's consider the availability of computing infrastructure. A great deal has been said about the computing requirement needs for success in AI. Programs like the Pan-Canadian AI Compute Environment, recent announcements of compute in the federal budget, and partnerships with Canadian companies such as Denver Data Works have provided capacity for research industry collaborations to take place. These have led to larger collaborations that drive impact in domains like healthcare and energy, where the scale of these projects wouldn't have been possible without the available infrastructure. Should be noted also, outside of the area of AI, we've seen investments like this drive clusters of impact. For example, many quantum and chip startups collaborate with researchers at the University of Alberta due to the government's investment in the university's nanotechnology fabrication facilities. Finally, we have found that breaking down the so-called language barriers has been vital in creating opportunities for industry to invest in research. At Amy, we talk a lot about quote-unquote bilingual researchers. Researchers who speak both the languages of a specific domain like energy, biology, healthcare, as well as artificial intelligence. As part of our recent hiring of new principal investigators to our group, we targeted researchers who would provide this dual expertise. Bringing researchers who deeply understand the domains of application have broken down the barriers that at times can exist between academia and industry. We expect this to continue to drive increasing competitive advantage for Canadian companies in the coming years. To summarize, targeted research investments, cross-domain researchers, and providing early project handholding and talent can lower the barrier to entry for research investment by Canadian industry and increase research and development overall. In order for Canada to lead both in AI and other fields in the coming years, we need Canadian industry to invest.
If you can please quickly wind up. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, yes. We need Canadian industry to invest as well as governments, and we look forward to working with everyone on growing that leadership.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Professor Utterson. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Honorable members of the committee, thank you for having me. I'm Kevin Utterson, professor at Boston University and the founding executive director of CarbX. We're the largest nonprofit initiative in the world that supports and translates early-stage development of innovative products to treat and prevent and diagnose bacterial infection. We've been a recipient of funding from the Canadian government since 2023, and we're very grateful for the support. Today, I'm going to talk focused about Canada's role in financing a complementary mix of push and pull incentives for new antibiotics that will help drive and grow private sector investment in research and development in Canada, in addition to addressing the public health need both in Canada and around the world for new antibiotics. Now, as you may well be aware, given the concern about antimicrobial resistance or AMR, the market for antibiotics is broken. This is a product that comes to the market, and we want to use it as little as possible in the first several years. That's great for public health. It's a disaster for the small companies. And so we need both push and pull incentives, grant-based things that happen before approval, and also something that happens after approval, and it reaches the market to make these products available to everyone, especially to Canadians who, in my prior academic work, came in dead last amongst the G7 in terms of access to new antibiotics. And we want to also encourage more private sector activity in this area. We're a nonprofit, but we work with all of the private sector companies that do this research. 2 years ago, I served as an international member of the expert panel for the Council of Canadian Academies project, which led to the report called Overcoming Resistance, building on prior work by CCA and also the Pan-Canadian Action Plan. This is a great report. The consensus is clear. It says without new incentives, antibiotic pipeline is going to be perilously thin, and Canadians are going to lack access, worse than any other G7 country. And second, the report said that if you do both push and pull incentives, you're going to restore the health to the pipeline. Canada can be a leader within the G7 on this issue, and you can protect the foundation of modern medicine. You wouldn't have a knee replacement or many cancer treatments. They would be less safe, more dangerous if you didn't have the safety net of antibiotics. These incentives work in different ways against the same problem. They work together and are both essential. Canada has already been acting on this. The Public Health Agency of Canada invested in CARB-X 2 years ago. We're grateful for that. CARB-X is currently supported by 6 G7 governments, including Canada, 3 private foundations, Wellcome, Gates, and Novo, as well as the European Commission will announce their support for us later in the year. This important role has been mentioned 4 times in the last G7 Health Minister communiques, also the G20, also at the UN General Assembly's high-level meeting on antimicrobial resistance last year. We've had 22 products make it to the human clinical trials. 3 have reached the market, which is remarkable given how thin the pipeline is. We're really grateful for the partnership with the Canadian government, which was historically represented by PHAC, Public Health Agency Canada, but now is transitioning to Health Emergency Readiness Canada, HERC, which will continue at a level that's commensurate, we hope, with other G7 governments. Considering what other governments are giving us, the Canadian amount would be something like 6 million Canadian dollars per year. The U.S. government is contributing 55 million, for example, Germany 15, Italy 12. The push incentives, like what you do to CARB-X, lower the cost of R&D. Obviously, we think they're useful, but we also need pull incentives. The Overcoming Resistance report has a very important pilot program on pull incentive, a revenue guarantee across Canada. This is very valuable, and it's important to get that right, and for that, when the pilot comes out, for it to be effective in working with the market, so that Canadians have access, and also that the research development is supported. Canada science community is world-class. A colleague of mine, Professor Jerry Wright at McMaster, I believe he's also testifying in this hearing at some point in the future. But one of the leading researchers in the world, a recent important paper in Nature on a discovery out of his lab. But he told me and said I could share with you that out of the 87 trainees and postdocs and PhD students and techs that's worked in his lab in the decades that he's been working at McMaster, today only 7 of them are still working in antimicrobial resistance. So there's a human capital problem, there's a pipeline problem, and it needs to be solved by a combination of push and pull. I'm grateful for what Canada is doing to make that happen. Thank you.
And we will start our round of questioning. The first round will be of 6 minutes each. We will start with MP Ho for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first set of questions is for Mr. Linke. So you mentioned in your opening statement that private investment in Canada in research in artificial intelligence has been relatively weak. Do you think this is the result of a failure in government policy that's causing our companies to fall behind our peers?
Is he frozen? Can you stop the clock? Can you
Maybe go to Mr.
Otterson. Yeah, we will check it. Mr. Ho, MP Ho, if you can pass it on to Mr. Otterson, or would you like to ask?
Sure.
Yeah, checking into it.
I'd rather just wait.
Okay, so yeah, we'll suspend the meeting, so we'll have a look at his connection. Meeting is suspended. with Ms. MP Ho. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Apologies for that.
We'll start the clock from the top. MP Ho, you have 6 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first set of questions is for Mr. Linke. So you mentioned in your opening statement that private investment in Canada in artificial intelligence research has been relatively weak. Do you think this is the result of a failure in government policy that's causing our companies to fall behind relative to our peers?
I think there's a couple structural things, as I mentioned. So one is just like realistically, we have a lot of SMEs and cash is king in SMEs. So it's tougher for them to make investments. And then, the second one is we have a lot of protected industries, and the incentive for protected industries to invest in R&D is a lot lower. That said, I was heartened. So I think risk capital matters a lot, and I was heartened in the last budget that there was funding specific for risk capital. I believe this is something that we need to do a lot more of in Canada. There are, I think, some structural things that we can maybe improve on the policy side, but to be honest, to me, it's a lot more of a piece of amount of available capital that's causing a big part of the challenge.
You mentioned about the structural piece that there's a lot of protected industries in Canada with a relatively few number of firms. Do you think the cause of that market structure is a result of too much regulation, too much red tape, and that tends to favor the large companies that are able to comply with that red tape and to protect their market share from new entrants who will need to be burdened with the extra regulatory cost in order to compete with the bigger firms?
Yeah, I think that there's things that we can do to bring competition into the country, and I think competition drives investment in research and development. If we're going to protect industries, there should be an encouragement or an expectation that those companies are investing in R&D to drive forward Canadian competitiveness.
So you mentioned about government funding and supports for research, development, commercialization, and depending on which study you look at, there's upwards of 100, close to 200 federal funding programs out there, and that sounds like that's a lot of programs. It's a lot of bureaucracy. Do you think that's part of the reason why the sheer amount of bureaucracy and paperwork involved do you think that's part of the reason why we're lagging behind our peers?
I think it contributes to it. I mentioned we tend to be grant heavy and capital light. So personally, I'm a little bit of a simple person. I'd like to see a lower number of programs that are targeted and have low administrative expectations. And to me, that capital should be focused on risk capital with people who know how to make these investments. And again, like an example of that is the fund of funds investment in the last budget. These types of investments, I think, are ways of growing the capital in the Canadian ecosystem to capitalize private Canadian companies to be able to grow and have the resources to make investments in R&D.
And why do you think we have a lack of private investment in Canada? Is it maybe too much red tape, too hard to get approvals to get things done, taxes being too high, or just an overall uncertain environment that with the government getting in the way of projects to get off the ground?
I think that what we're seeing is a little bit of momentum. So you're seeing a bit of an increase recently in venture momentum. That needs to increase, and we should be looking at capitalizing the Canadian ecosystem better. Things like expectations around the Canadian, large Canadian pension funds investing in venture in Canada. Would be able to help grow the amount of capital in that ecosystem. So I think some of the structural barriers for venture investment in Canada have gone down, and we've seen increases in Canadian venture because of it. To me, it's about getting more capital into that ecosystem overall.
Hey, my next set of questions is for Mr. Alderson. Do you think there's a mismatch in incentives in terms of supports for research and development and commercialization of new ideas in Canada?
There certainly is globally, and Canada follows a similar pattern. We have pretty good funding for basic research, and I'm sure that researchers in the US, Europe, and Canada would all say we need more, but at least there's a stable base there. And what's lacking is the ability to translate that into a product that survives market entry.
So, what are some of the ways that you think that we can sort of support that ecosystem?
The Overcoming Resistance report from Council of Canadian Academies 2 years ago has a comprehensive list, and I was one of, I think, 11 co-authors of that report. The majority of the authors are Canadian. I fully support those recommendations, which are basically we need to find ways for these drugs to be launched on the Canadian market and for there to be some way to recover the sunk cost investment in research and development. The prices are relatively low in Canada for antibiotics, and as a result, the fewest number of new antibiotics have been launched in Canada compared to all of the G7 members plus 7 other high-income countries in Europe that are not members of the G7. That has everything to do with the company's commercial decision that we're not going to make enough money for launching. And then Canadian doctors are put into the position of, if their patient needs, an antibiotic which is not yet approved in Canada, but it's been approved in Europe and the United States for 5 years or longer, they have to go through an emergency process to get that drug, and the patient, needs it now, not 3 days from now.
Okay. Thank you. We will now proceed to MP Noor Mohammed for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. I'm going to start with Mr. Linky Kam. It's always great to see you, and thank you for the work that you and Amy do. I want to kind of pick up a little bit on what you talked a little bit about in your opening comments and in your response to Mr. Ho's question. There are folks that are desperate to try to figure out how to blame government for the fact that there isn't as much early stage startup capital in this country. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, it's less about government, more about the risk appetite of pension funds and others in this country. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the need for the venture community in this country and for investors in this country to take the same types of risks on Canadian businesses that they're willing to take outside of Canada. And, in this budget, there's $1 billion, as you point out, for venture, another $750 for early stage. This is to incentivize the private sector. But what do you think it is that the private sector investment community in this country actually needs psychologically in order to be able to value Canadian early stage companies in the same way that they value other early stage companies from outside this country? And how do we incentivize, not just with money, but how do we incentivize or open the eyes and minds of investors in this country to look beyond second and beyond the first round? How do we make sure that they are the first money, and rather than waiting for others to take the risk?
Great question, and I always appreciate this discussion overall. I think there's two challenges that I've talked about in the past. One is capital, and the other is customers. And both of those, I think, are really vital. So there's a bit of a structural challenge in Canada on where dollars are going. There is more in venture, but it typically is later in the process versus that first check-in. And so there's an opportunity to be able to fill the gap on that first check-in investment that needs to happen. If not, what we see over and over is those companies will go south of the border for that first check, and odds are they're going to move south of the border in that process. The second part is we have a low velocity when it comes to customer interaction with our startups here in Canada. The amount that our Canadian companies, because our adoption of technology is low, leads to a lower customer base for Canadian startups. And this means that if the government's not a customer of companies and Canadian businesses aren't customers of companies, then you're again, selling outside of your jurisdiction, which is typically south of the border. So now your capital south of the border, your customers are south of the border, and the odds of you staying north of the border are not really high. So I think those are two really big things. Capital I've talked about quite extensively. I think the other one is customers. If we can do a lot to encourage Canadian companies and Canadian government to buy from Canadians, we can help head that off.
So, as you know, a big part of this budget is making sure that there is incentive for Canadians to buy Canadian, for Canadian government to procure Canadian. One of the challenges, of course, that I think a lot of early stage companies in this country face is how do you get your fellow Canadian companies to see Canadian innovation as good as, and I think this is something that I think you and others in this space are working towards. I mean, I'm heartened by, unfortunately, the instability in the United States has actually forced Canada to look inward in terms of those opportunities. But, you know, digging a little bit deeper into this question about customers, obviously government can procure and is now mandated to procure Canadians at the federal level, at the provincial level. There's lots more of this happening. But for Canadian companies, that risk, the perceived risk that they have to take to buy Canadian or to buy from a Canadian company that they may not know as well as a big name from another country, how do we get over that? How do we get around that hump in the first instance? And the second piece to this really is how do you backstop that such that you see that growth happening in terms of the customer set for Canadians? Now, you know, I'm not talking about, you know, government intervention here, because I think that's, you know, that may be something that, of course, then people will rail against that and say they're not really viable, this, that, and the other. But how do we make sure that commercially viable businesses that are being built in this country are able to sell to Canadian government, not just to government, but to the private sector in this country?
Yeah, I think on the government side, every startup I've talked to has not asked for priority treatment, like, hey, we're the worst product, but buy us anyways. They want to be able to compete on a level basis. And there's a number of structural pieces in there. An example of a company that I know, they can't sell into the Canadian government because they haven't sold into the Canadian government, which seems like a funny cycle that they'll probably never get around. So I think there's some structural pieces that just level the playing field to buy from Canadian companies, you know, from the government. We've seen some pieces there where that reference customer makes a big difference, and then Canadian companies will adopt after. On our side, the other piece we do is we help on the hand-holding side of working with companies directly, but on Canadian platforms. And the ability for us to be a bit of that bridge between the two, we've seen help make sure that, you know, companies that we work with are end up on Canadian startups as a platform, and we always seek to do that in our work.
So with the remaining time I have left, which I think is, well, anyways, then I will not ask another question. I will just thank you both for your time.
Thank you. And we will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Gironca for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins qui sont avec nous.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to welcome our two witnesses. In the 2025 budget, there's been an announcement of tax incentives for companies to do more R&D. But as you pointed out, many of them are already having trouble navigating their way through the several programs that exist. Now, Canada is capable of doing research in universities, colleges, research institutes, but Ottawa has chosen to just keep adding new incentives rather than support those places that are already working well. Now, you work on a daily basis with SMEs. Do you think that this approach is a good one, or are they just adding yet another complex layer to a system that's already difficult to understand and use?
Monsieur Link, je l'ai mentionné dans mon introduction.
My question was for Mr. Link.
I don't have details of the specific implementation to be able to say this is a complex layer or not. At least from what I've seen in the budget, you know, focused on things that are clear around depreciation, you know, for around tax depreciation, tend to be fairly clear things about what happens, streamlining of SHRED. So some of these things, at least, you know, without seeing the entire implementation plan, are things that are bringing down the kind of structural challenges or kind of increased admin burden of some of these programs. Always would love to see more of that, but at least as a start, I've seen that in the budget here.
Monsieur Ling, toujours pour vous. Le gouvernement répète dans
Mr.
son
Link, another question for you. The government, in the budget that it tabled on the 4th of November, that says that it wants to buy Canadian. But if you're going to buy Canadian, you have to incentivize or strengthen the Canadians who are doing the work. We have local capacity, and we have our own champions in AI and other areas. But in the budget, more than $1 billion is going to be spent on attracting foreign research. But we're not even supporting our own centers adequately, and they have a difficulty navigating our own programs. Do you not feel that's a contradiction in terms, that we're just going to make our own ecosystem more vulnerable and fragile by funding visiting researchers or research rather than using that research that already exists in our universities and colleges?
I'll say that's not how I read it. To me, we need to have a growing research capacity in Canada, and the $1 billion to attract outside researchers to come to Canada grows Canadian research capacity overall. So to me, that's further knowledge into the ecosystem, further investment in the ecosystem, and further opportunity for those research collaborations to happen. That said, we need to make sure that things around buy Canadian, around that there's clear support for that research to be commercialized into a form that can be bought. These are all important pieces, but without us continuing to grow that core research base, we may run out of expertise to be able to continue to create the ideas that get bought by the Canadian government.
Donc, pour vous, est-ce que les chercheurs universitaires...
Do you think local researchers are having trouble already? Like, are our labs in a good state? I mean, you're saying that it's good to have outside researchers, but I'm trying to understand, are we reinforcing research and innovation when budgets are cut to these places to support research?
Yeah, I mean, you'll always find an advocate in me of further investment in research and further investment in the things that we are doing here in Canada. We have great universities, we have great polytechnics, we have great institutes that are doing very strong work. And I think, to me, I would always love to see further investment in them, especially targeted investment in specific areas that we can be champions in Canada. I don't see them as exclusive. All of those universities need new professors. They need new students. They need new researchers to be able to grow their overall capacity. So I don't see the two in conflict. But I think certainly if we're bringing new researchers here or growing our overall research base, we also need to make sure that we're continuing to invest in the existing research excellence that we have.
Merci, M. Ling. Vous savez, le budget doit être voté ce soir.
Thank you, Mr. Ling. Do you know we'll be voting on this budget tonight? Several times I sent messages to the ministers responsible and the Minister of Industry. I guess the word science has been taken out of that department, but anyway, I asked for explanations on research support, innovation support, and I never even got an answer. I didn't even get a confirmation that my emails had been read. So in a sector where clarity is important, do you not think there is room to modernize our ecosystem when even our own ministers can't even answer their emails?
It sounds like a great opportunity to adopt some great Canadian technologies that work in the space. I'd love to see more of that. That's probably all I can comment on the area.
Monsieur Ling, vous, comment vous percevez ça? Un parlementaire qui n'est même pas capable d'avoir une
Mr.
discussion.
Link, here we have a parliamentarian who can't even have an exchange with another parliamentarian. How do you see that, you being a player in this ecosystem? I mean, this minister is responsible for building the infrastructure here in the ecosystem.
It's a tough thing for me to comment on an interaction from the outside. I'm not trying to bow out of the conversation. I just don't really have any details.
Je peux vous le dire, moi je trouve ça gênant, irresponsable.
Well, I can tell you, I think it's embarrassing, irresponsible. And this is not a government that is transparent. It's not a government that wants to work with opposition parties to strengthen.
Be de-reader for like 5 minutes. This is the start of our second round. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Linke, this question is for you. You are infiltrated in the startup community, and so you know that with especially technology, AI, and innovation, the retention of our intellectual property, our data, and the patents on our technology is what is important to have in this country, because that's the economic growth out of all of our startups. What is this current government doing to ensure that we are retaining our intellectual property and data within our startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think to me, the IP question is a big question. When you look at where IP is created, it's very often created, and it as it should be, in a business context where it's going to drive business value for that company. And when we have a lack of research and investment adoption and lack of research and investment made by Canadian industry, we're going to see less IP, in Canadian industry ultimately. So to me, the pieces around Buy Canadian are big, because that provides more revenue capital and more customers that are very clear and aligned to what that business's value is, and gives them the ability to create more IP on top of that. Things like the ability to use tax incentives to grow the ability to invest in R&D, same thing. So I'm seeing, even though it's a second order effect, these are the things ultimately that can drive IP investment in Canada.
The Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre, Canada's Innovation Capital, I see that there's a ton of technology coming out of our riding, a lot of IP and a lot of data. And what I'm also seeing, and I'm going to ask you, do you think that we're paying other countries right now to own our IP and data through our research and funding and tax credits in Canada?
I can't speak to every university and program and region, but I can speak to ours, is that the times that we're seeing Canadian researchers whose IP ends up, at times in a foreign company, that company is paying for it. So it isn't an investment by Canadian taxpayers or provincial taxpayers. It's an investment by that company. The opportunity is for Canadian companies, to make that investment. And the more we see of that, the more we're going to see that IP north of the border. So to me, that's the bigger gap, more than it's the taxpayer paying for these things.
But in a lot of these cases, are we not paying for the funding that's going into the technology or into the research behind these startups in these companies? Are we not funding that through our research initiatives?
Everything's going to be case by case. I think we've created a lot of the base technologies here, and which ones and how they can be specifically protected, I think is a little bit of an ongoing discussion. We're obviously looking at more ways of seeing that realized here in Canada. What we are seeing is, typically when there's IP that ends up outside the country, it is more about that company paying for that research in their business context. And they've often hired somebody to be able to do that. So it isn't, a piece of co-research that ends up south of the border. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but we're seeing it more where the investment's made by outside an international company, and that investment isn't made by a Canadian company.
Would that company, though, have gone through an incubator program that's publicly funded before that investor comes along, typically?
We haven't seen that. I mean, there are certainly Canadian companies that get bought by U.S. companies, and I think being protectionist about that might present a challenge on the investability of those companies. So certainly, as you see startups come through incubators and then create a company, they're going to get investment, and there's multiple paths to exit, and one of those is to be purchased. So there's a potential path for companies to be bought there, but that's kind of like the natural life cycle of startups, and does recycle more capital into the ecosystem for new things to be able to grow.
Do you think it's important for these companies to have some sort of retention of their IP and data in Canada?
Yeah, I would like to see more IP and data retained in Canada by Canadian companies. I think the best way to do that is to have more Canadian companies investing in research and development, creating more scalable companies where their path is kind of more often to IPO or to be a large sustainable company. The goal would be to see that happen a lot more often.
Do you think less red tape and lower taxes would help drive that?
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now proceed to MP McKelvey for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Linky. Link, please correct me as needed. So the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, I think you would argue, has been very successful. I'm just wondering if you could maybe outline what was that recipe for success?
Thanks. It is Linky, but honestly, Link or Linky, all work, so I'll go by any of them. I think the core is that great ecosystems are built on top of talent. And what we've done extremely well here is to continue to invest in the talent that we have to attract incredible outside people here to come set up and to make Canada their home, to attract talented young researchers in the form of grad students who come and make Canada their home and then build their companies and their lives here. I think that as the basis has been is the core of every incredible ecosystem. It's what every country, every region around the world is trying to do, is trying to grow and attract the best and the brightest in the world. That's what creates new startups, that creates new R&D in companies. You have to have that base, or you can't have further success on top of it. So that, to me, I think has been the most successful thing.
So we had the talent, we had the ideas, we had the people. We know we're trying to do more of that through this budget with the attraction piece that's in there and to attract and retain researchers here in Canada. And then we were intentional in setting up a strategy that played to the strengths across the country and really enabled. So my question is, do we need to do more of that as a country and be deliberate in our research investments and try and be strategic? And then I put to you, are there fields, quantum computing, for example, or things in the defense sector? Like what is our next Pan-Canadian strategy that we have from your point of view?
Yeah, so I think there's two pieces to that. So one, we very intentionally invested in centers where there was a center of gravity and a critical mass of expertise, specifically in Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton. And I think continuing that makes a lot of sense. And the field of AI is growing like crazy. This needs to continued investment, I think, is going to see just enormous returns. So seeing that is really important. The other thing we did in the kind of recent round of researchers that we've brought into the group is what I kind of mentioned as bilingual, so AI plus X. So there are researchers who typically would be in computing science instead are in biology, medicine, linguistics, physics, space. There are areas like this. And I think there's a big opportunity for Canada to double down on dual expertise, to say we're really incredible in the areas of virology, we're really incredible in the areas of quantum or specific areas of quantum. And is there ways that we can double down on saying we're great in quantum or we're great in genomics and we're great in AI, and let's pair the two together to really do something special where we're kind of really, really great in each, but together we're the combination of the two is kind of something that couldn't be found anywhere else in the world. And I think that's a very big opportunity for the entire country.
Okay, thank you. And I agree, this interdisciplinarity is definitely a strength of Canadians. My next question is for Dr. Outerson, and again, correct me if I pronounce it wrong. You have done, your work has been with partnerships with the US, UK, Germany, international foundations. I'm just wondering, when you look internationally to some of your partners, are there examples that we should be learning from in terms of IP retention, commercialization? Who is doing it well? And if we want to look for models elsewhere, who should we be looking to?
Thank you for the question. One of the advantages of CARB-X is that instead of these small companies having to apply to 10 different governments and foundations, that we kind of collect it and they all apply through a single portal. And that helps them to not waste money. We're non-dilutive. We don't take their IP in any form. And we actually put them through a process in which we help them to improve their IP estate. We look back at the original license, typically from a university, and try to clean up any mistakes that were made in that regard. More broadly, I think that something that other governments do well that Canada might think about is the small business, the SBIR grant, which helps ideas translate from university into a small startup. There's a form of that in the U.S., there's forms of that in Europe. To my knowledge, there's not one in Canada, and it's been very valuable in those other settings. To making sure the IP.
Thank you. We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Juncker for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to move on with Mr. Linke. Canada has some of the best AI centres. You have named some. There's one in Montreal that was founded by a Quebecer, and who is actually the most quoted in the world. So we do have talented people here. But despite that, despite the scientific strength, we still haven't managed to build an industrial ecosystem that's able to rival its American or Asian counterparts. And in the most recent budget, the government is focusing on outdoor research as tax incentives, but there's nothing here to actually support regional benefits, economic benefits, and even though we have some of the best centres like that in Montreal. So perhaps Canada excels in research, but it's actually not focusing enough on its economic value. Are we not becoming a country that is actually working for others rather than transforming ourselves into a super science power?
So this is an area of particular, interest for me. My background's on the startup investment side of the world, so realizing this in Canada matters a lot to me. I think there's a couple pieces to it. One is the provinces also invest in the area, and we see provincial investment in commercialization activities. So that is one way of the government investing in the area, and the federal government and the provinces working together on this. The second part to it is, while I do think grants and programs can be targeted and very helpful, I do think the biggest challenge is still in capital. And seeing when I look at our grads, for instance, who've ended up leaving, it's not because they wanted to leave Canada. It's not because they didn't have an incredible life here. It was for opportunity. And we see more, I needed to move because my first check was elsewhere, or my first check and my first customer were elsewhere. And now the commercialization activity of that graduate ends up being elsewhere as well. So I think it's very important to have a well-capitalized system, especially at the early stage.
Sorry, I'll stop the clock. I think there are some problems. Mr. Linke's internet is not very stable. So I'll give him a second. Mr. Linke, are you good? Can you say a few sentences? He's frozen.
Oui, Madame la Présidente.
Yes.
Madam Chair, I think Mr. Linke's connection sort of reflects the federal budget, disconnected from the people.
Que vous en pensez?
What do you think?
It's always embarrassing as a technology organization to have bad internet or the internet to go down in a situation like this.
So it's back. Mr. Linke, you can please respond to Mr. Blanchet-Juncker's question. You have like 20 seconds.
Sorry, I didn't catch the question. I just caught the comment about my internet.
Mr. Blanchet-Juncker, can you please repeat the question?
Oui,
so
oui.
we'll give you...
Monsieur Linke, je voulais simplement vous demander...
Mr. Linke, I simply want to ask you if your connectivity problems sort of reflected the federal budget being out of touch as well with real needs.
As I mentioned, seeing investment in capital and seeing investment in researchers coming to Canada, I do think were important investments in seeing commercialization. So hopefully it's better connected than, unfortunately, my internet here.
Merci beaucoup. Lâchez pas.
Thank you. And we will end this panel with 2 minutes to Mr. Holman and then 2 minutes to MP McKelvey. So MP Holman, please go ahead. You will have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses that are here today in front of the Science and Research Committee. Mr. Linke, Canada positions itself as a leader in AI, yet we remain behind our peers in launching new antibiotics. From your vantage point, what are specific AI-enabled opportunities that Canada is failing to capitalize right now with respect to antibiotics?
On the AI front, I can tell you that while not specific to antibiotics, we're part of a national consortium around pandemic preparedness and working on leveraging AI to be able to design vaccines that can be rapidly deployed in the case of a new pandemic. I think that this is a very big opportunity for Canada to be able to use similar things for antibiotics. We've seen AI as a technology be able to be a great lever in the acceleration of new antibiotics being created, and certainly something that's an incredible opportunity here in Canada. Again, this is part of this pairing of the two together. We're fortunate here to have Nobel laureate Dr. Michael Houghton, and so being able to pair, somebody like Mike Houghton and expertise of the research institute that we have, we think is going to bear really fruitful results.
And a follow-up question to you, Mr. Linke. What prevents AI talent from moving into research and development? Funding models, regulatory barriers, or lack of industry partners? Any specific recommendations you can make to address these barriers?
Often we talk about internships and things during study. There is what we call a bit of a leaky pipeline right after graduation, where either the opportunity is right away in a large U.S. company that does a large amount of hiring and onboarding, or to be able to support them, as they are a very risky early entrepreneur and are off to create their new business. I think there's a big opportunity to make sure that those research opportunities for postgraduates are in Canada and allow them to further create their homes here and create IP for Canada and Canadians, and make sure that first check in. So we're investing in the startups and the people that we're creating in the institutes.
Thank you. Time is up. And we will end this panel with MP McKelvey for 2 minutes. Or MP Noor Mohammed will take?
I passed my time.
Okay, MP Noor Mohammed, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to kind of put a wrap on the conversation we were having, Mr. Linke, earlier. One of the things that I think I would observe, and perhaps you might share this observation or not, I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts, is this idea that every investment has to be a home run. And every investment has to be, a 10-bagger, 20-bagger right off the bat. How do we think about an ecosystem in this country where sometimes getting on base and having that first couple of wins so that you can actually go and raise a larger round? How do we get into that psychology as well, where our companies are actually our investors are actually looking to make sure that second and third round can actually happen? So going back to the earlier conversation, how do we, as government, now for a moment, cultivate the type of environment beyond the things that we've already talked about doing to ensure that first check can actually come in? And what do you think the reticence is in the investment community to actually being that first check?
Great question, and I'm just white knuckling my internet here towards the end, and hopefully he'll stay with me. I think there's a couple pieces. One, it's hard for people to invest in an area that they don't know, and we know that AI literacy in Canada isn't that high. And so increasing AI literacy across the country, I think, will create an opportunity for both more adoption and more informed investment at the earlier stage. So that's one area that is really important. And then, the second piece is making it easier for the incredible talent that we attract here to stay. So I think there's some things that we can do visa-wise to be able to encourage that talent to stay, make it easier for them to be invested in, and then have that cycle of new company creation and their success here, stay in Canada.
Great. Thank you. I think I'm out of time. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'll thank both the witnesses for appearing before the committee, and thanks to all the members. So is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Okay, the meeting is adjourned.
Bye.